What did we make of the Royals' PECOTA projections? We'll tell you in this edition of Locked On Royals.
You are Locked On Royals, your daily Kansas City Royals podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Thank you for tuning in to another edition of Locked On Royals and the Locked On Podcast Network. As always, I'm your host, Jack Johnson, and you can find me on Twitter or X at JohnnyJ_15. And you can also find us on wherever you get your podcast. That can be Spotify, Apple Podcast, Amazon Music, a bunch of others, also on Odyssey and YouTube. Just be sure to hit that follow button and subscribe. If you're a first-time listener and you want to know a little bit more about me and this show specifically, I'm based here in Kansas City. I work at Sports Radio 810 WHB doing a variety of things. But when you come to this podcast, when you click on this link, you know that you're going to be getting 30 straight minutes of Royals baseball. Today's show is brought to you by FanDuel. Super Bowl 59 is here, and there's no better way to make every play more exciting than with FanDuel Sportsbook. New customers can bet just $5, and if you win, you'll score $200 in bonus bets. Download the app or head to FanDuel.com to get started today. Well, we don't usually do our episode on Monday for our 3 episodes a week. We typically go Tuesday, Thursday, Friday. But since we did an earlier episode because of the Carlos Estevez deal, we are going to change it up a little bit this week. Probably we'll do a Monday, Wednesday, then Friday. Could see a Thursday one as well. But I do want to remind everybody that beginning the week of February 10th, which is next Monday, we'll be back to 5 episodes a week. So our off season is officially over. So next week, back to normal, 5 episodes. And then the week after that, we will be in Surprise, Arizona, covering that first full squad workout. We'll be bringing you tons of content, interview, video, pretty much all you can't miss down there in the early portion of spring training. We'll be back in Kansas City before the games start, but hopefully that behind-the-scenes type look will be very exciting because last year we had a lot of fun doing it and got a lot of good reviews from that as well. So same thing we're doing this year. For our segments today, going to be bouncing around a little bit because when you get some of that breaking news over the weekend, can't really wait until Tuesday or Wednesday to do an episode. And one of those breaking news stories was that we found out the Royals actually made an offer to Anthony Santander for a lot of money. So if you were worried about the Royals penny pinching and not giving a lot of money to certain guys out there on the market, they have been aggressively pursuing guys. I know at the end of the day, it really only matters if you land that player, but they were in on Santander. They were in on Jurickson Profar, and we'll dive into why those deals didn't happen in the second segment. Then in the third segment, we'll talk about who they may pivot to in free agency. Now that we know that door is a little bit more open and there's still about 10 days to go before pitchers and catchers report, we're going to dive into some names that might make sense. We've brought him up a lot, but now that Ken Rosenthal reported it a little bit more in his article over the weekend, we're going to dive into that. To kick things off, though, we're going to talk about the Royals' PECOTA projections and what we do make of that win-loss total, where they are in the standings, and maybe why you should feel optimistic, why you should feel a little bit negative on it. Maybe you put a lot of stock into PECOTA projections. Maybe you put a lot into steamer projections, zips, all that type of stuff. I do think there is some validity to it, but it's not the end-all, be-all. I mean, last year, I think the Royals' win-loss projection was around 70, if I'm not mistaken, and they shattered that by 16 games. What I am pretty surprised about is that the Royals were picked ahead of Cleveland and Detroit. Minnesota is winning this division per PECOTA with their 86.5 win total. The Royals are right there around 81.2. Then you've got Cleveland and Detroit behind Kansas City, and the White Sox round out with about 61 wins there projected on PECOTA. So we'll start with the optimistic part of it. Based off what we saw last year in the American League Central, you had the Tigers who had the late season surge. They've now gone out there and got Jack Flaherty for their rotation. They've got Alex Cobb to pair with Reese Olson and Casey Mize. That'll be a loaded group. And then bullpen, they had Tommy Kahnle to an already decorated bunch, it feels like. There's a lot of power in the back end of that bullpen for Detroit. The big issue is they haven't spent any money offensively. There's not a lot of guys they've gone out there to bolster that lineup. That has been a concern for Detroit this offseason. And now really the only guy left that makes a lot of sense for them, but we'll see if they can match up dollars-wise, is Alex Bregman. He's got that connection to A.J. Hinch. I think it would be a perfect fit, but there's a lot of other teams in the running. Houston's in the running. The Cubs are in the running. I could also see Boston making a play on it as well. But Detroit just hasn't done much for an offense that wasn't very good. Even during their surge last year, it was more so about that bullpen, and it was more so about that starting rotation. Then you look at Cleveland. We're talking about the division winner here, the team that got to the American League Championship Series, and they got the Royals ahead of Cleveland. And that's before the Royals have even added this bat that they're wanting to go out there and get. Who knows how significant that bat would be, but I still remain confident that there will be an addition to this lineup before the beginning of spring training. With Cleveland, I can understand the regression. I mean, their rotation, they do get Shane Bieber back, but, the bullpen, they're bound for some regression because of how overworked they were. They subtracted from a lineup that was still pretty top-heavy. No more Josh Naylor, no more Andres Jimenez, though he was more so known for his glove. You still have Jose Ramirez. I know Royals fans don't like facing him, but it's still a lineup like Detroit, and I guess you could say like Kansas City, that's just very top-heavy. There are some very weak points in that lineup, which is why I think the PECOTA projections have them below Kansas City. The White Sox, we don't need to spend much time on. I actually think that the 61 and a half is something I would take the over on. I think the White Sox are going to get probably around that 62, 63 win total, mainly because it's really hard to lose as many as they did last year. And I think they've got more of a well-rounded group, more of a stable lineup than they had last year. I think they can get about 62 or 63 wins, though not really threaten anybody in the American League Central. Minnesota, I think, was the team that most of our listeners and most of our commenters on Twitter made a big fuss about. Why is a team that didn't even make the postseason last year projected to win 86 games and clear this division by 5 games? I think on paper, as I said last year, Minnesota completely healthy is a team to be reckoned with. I think they are a team that you should be fearful of if they stay healthy. You have Carlos Correa in that lineup. You've got Royce Lewis. You pair that with a rotation that's got Joe Ryan. You got Bailey Ober, Pablo Lopez. Back end of the bullpen, Griffin Jax is so underrated. Johan Duran at the back end. I mean, it can be a very scary bunch. Don't get me wrong on that. But how many times have we had this conversation about Minnesota? They don't stay healthy. I mean, as much as we would like to say, yeah, if that guy stays healthy, if this guy does that, they're going to be really good. It's all a bunch of hypotheticals, though. It's all a bunch of shoulda, woulda, coulda, and if. And I think if you use if too much when you're talking about a division winner and a first-place team, are we really talking about a division winner? I mean, I think with the Royals, a lot of that if is, well, if they can get MJ Melendez going, that middle of the order is going to be just fine. Or if Jonathan India gets back to Rookie of the Year form, that top of the lineup is going to be very scary in the American League. But you have more data now that maybe that's not going to be true. I mean, Carlos Correa is not really a durable player anymore. Royce Lewis is not a durable player. Byron Buxton is not a durable player. So I can understand the pushback as to why Minnesota was picked to win this division. But I do think if they don't get bitten by the injury bug, they're going to be a very tough out for the division. So I think that's some of the optimistic point of view here for the Royals being a 81-win team, being second place in this division, 5 games back in Minnesota. It's clear the projections think that the Royals can pretty much follow up what they did last year with another pretty good season. The downside to this is that they're all really interchangeable, right? Minnesota and Cleveland and Detroit and Kansas City are all easily mixed and matched. Like, you could see Minnesota win this division. You could also see it like last year where they finished 4th after a disastrous September. The Royals could be an 81 team in second place. They also could be 5, 6, 7 games out of first place, and that wouldn't be that successful of a year, in my opinion. And they really didn't separate themselves from the rest of the pack. But I also think the Central is going to be very similar to what we saw last year. I don't think there will be that one team like Cleveland that builds a substantial lead by May or June, and then everybody's playing catch-up. But even then, the Royals came back and tied them. I mean, they were back 9, 10 games in June and found a way by August to catch up to Cleveland and tie them for first place. So I don't know if we're going to have a runaway winner. I think there's going to be multiple points throughout this season where maybe all four of those teams have a chance where they're in first place, and we're talking about them being the best in the division. Then by August and September, we're really going to see that separation. Can Detroit follow up that miracle run by winning 85 to 90 games? Can Kansas City pretty much do the same thing and not expect regression from their rotation and not expect that lineup to get in their way again? Can Cleveland win 90-plus games with a rotation that is barely pieced together and an offense that had players subtracted from it? Can Minnesota stay healthy? That's their biggest question mark, because I think they got the talent there. It's going to be a fun division. I doubt we're going to see three teams from the Central get to the postseason and all be fighting for a playoff spot come September. But I do think even more so than last year, because we do have a successful Royals team that we can go back to, I think this division is more winnable than it was last year. I'm still going to wait and see when the dust settles in spring training what additions have been made to all the Central teams. But as of right now, I don't expect Cleveland to be as good as they were last year. Detroit's going to have to add another bat or two, I think, to really be that top team in the Central. Minnesota is always going to have those injury concerns. And then with Kansas City, yeah, if you can't add a bat, then I think they're still in that second to third place range. But if they add a significant bat to pair with what they have, an upgraded bullpen, a rotation that remained intact, they're going to have a pretty good chance to go out there and win the division. It's still a lot of time before we do get to the regular season. I know that baseball's right around the corner for spring training, but we still got about another month to go, more than a month, actually, more than a month and a half, actually, before we do begin the regular season. And we'll get a pretty good look as to what these teams look like. As you can tell with the helmets behind me, opening day will be between the Kansas City Royals and the reigning American League Central champs in the Cleveland Guardians. Okay, we're going to take our first break of the show. When we come back, the Royals actually made a significant offer to one of the biggest bats in free agency. What did we make of it? How close were they? And why did it fall through? We'll talk about that next on Locked On Royals. You are tuned into Locked On Royals and the Locked On Podcast Network. I'm your host, Jack Johnson, and you can find me on Twitter or X at JohnnyJ_15. Want to give a shout out to our first and only sponsor today in FanDuel. Super Bowl 59 is here. One game, two teams, endless possibilities. And there's no better way to make every play more exciting than with FanDuel Sportsbook. Whether it's predicting the first touchdown, calling the MVP, or even betting on the coin toss, FanDuel makes it easy to get in on the action. With live betting all game long, you can adjust your bets as the game unfolds and feel the thrill from kickoff to the final whistle. Download the app or head to FanDuel.com to get started. Bet just $5, and if you win, you'll score $200 in bonus bets. That's FanDuel.com. Bet with FanDuel, an official partner of Super Bowl 59. For one of my many picks that I'm going to have this week, I will take the over on receiving yards for Xavier Worthy and the Kansas City Chiefs. I'd expect him to have another big game here in the Super Bowl matchup against the Philadelphia Eagles. This has been a topic that I've been ready to talk about for 2 to 3 days now, because I believe this news broke on Friday per Ken Rosenthal that the Royals had made an offer to Anthony Santander after that deal had been presented to him by the Toronto Blue Jays. So Kansas City's offer came in at 3 years, $66 million. The Blue Jays upped that with a 5-year, 92 plus million was where it was finally set at. So by the year count and the money, Anthony Santander was just getting a better deal from the Blue Jays than he was for the Royals. Maybe you are somebody that looks at that and says, why should that matter? Right? The Royals came clear behind Toronto in making a play for Anthony Santander. That offer wasn't that close to what the Blue Jays settled with. And the Royals still are looking for that middle of the order bat. So why should I care? It was also reported by Ken Rosenthal that the Royals tried to make a play with Jurickson Profar, but they weren't willing to go that extra year, the one that he eventually got in Atlanta, that 3-year, $40+ million deal. So both those guys off the books. They are not available in free agency anymore, of course. Santander going to be spending the next 3 to 5 years with the Blue Jays. Jurickson Profar likely the next 2 to 3 years in Toronto. The reason I would say to people why this matters is I think it gives a little bit of a clear image as to how aggressively the Royals are going after some of those guys. Maybe some of you out there were a little bit concerned that the Royals were trying to penny pinch. They were being too cheap. They were never in play for some of these guys. And I'll be honest, with how quiet it was on the Santander front, I had no expectation that they were going to ever make a play for him because I just didn't think he was the perfect fit. But from this article by Ken Rosenthal, they felt like he could go be their everyday right fielder. They could then platoon Melendez and Hunter Renfroe out there in left field. It would have made sense for the lineup. He's not really a high OBP guy. Some of those numbers might have been inflated by Baltimore's dimensions at Camden Yards. So those were all things I was factoring in, and the fact that he was 30 and he's wanting a multiple-year deal. I just didn't expect the Royals to be offering him that much money and for 3 years. I mean, I think that would have been a very fair offer for Santander, but the fact that the Blue Jays swung and missed on so many other free agents, they weren't going to allow that to happen again with Santander. So they go the extra mile. They give him 5 years. They give him 90+ million. That kind of knocks the Royals offer off the table there. But if you look at the upside to this, and then pivoting to go get Carlos Estevez on a 2-year, $20 million deal with, I think it was that player option and not a club option, if I'm not mistaken. I know one of our commenters brought it up. I'd have to go back and look at it. And right now my phone's acting up a little bit, but it could be for 3 years. It was a significant investment into a reliever, something I didn't believe the Royals were really wanting to do. But if you don't get Santander, you got some money to spend. Why not go and shore up the back end of your bullpen, which was also a weak point for your team 70 to 75% of the season, really before you went out and got Lucas Erceg. But now I look at the possibility of adding that bat, and I said this on Twitter Friday night, which was I'm more confident than ever now they're going to go out there and get a bat. And the reason is I don't believe you make an offer like that, $66 million over 3 years to one of the biggest bats in free agency, and then pull away and say, well, we're going to go get a reliever, but we're done looking for a bat, right? There's no way we can go out there and get a bat with what's left. We don't like it. And I could understand that part. You may not like what's available in free agency. And we'll talk about that in the third and final segment today. But if you were going after Santander in free agency, clearly meant that you weren't finding a good match on the trade market. So you dipped your toe in free agency, something you weren't too keen on going into the offseason, and you tried to make a late play at a guy that was wanting a lot of money. So knowing right there, money was not going to be a problem. That's what should give you confidence, right? $66 million, it shows you that John Sherman was willing to go way over the payroll for opening day to bring in somebody like Santander. And I believe PECOTA and Sherman have that connect where if JJ likes a certain player, John Sherman will fork over the money to get that player. It's also got to make sense, right? Because it shouldn't just be about bettering your team for 2024. You want to make sure you're getting a good player the year after that and the year after that. It doesn't always work out that way. You give somebody a 6-year deal who's 32 years old, you're obviously not going to be getting the same player at age 36, 37, and 38 that you were at 32, 33, and 34. But to know that money was not going to be an issue, now I think that a deal could be done where, hey, if we still don't like it on the trade market, we're still going to go spend money on somebody that is not really budging on their price range. Like if Randall Grichuk is wanting $12 million on a 1-year deal, I'm more confident now the Royals would make a play on that than maybe they would have 2 months ago. Because when you get to a certain point in the offseason, you got to start being a little bit more aggressive. You're going to have to start making those moves that you were being patient on back in December, back in January. Now you're 9 days away from when pitchers and catchers report, and then the first full squad workout is the following Monday. You're going to have to be aggressive and go make that play on a free agent if they're still out there. And for the Royals, because Santander was signed 2 weeks ago, they knew they were kind of getting late in the game here. And so they thought, well, maybe we can strike a deal with him. But even though they pivoted to give some of that money to Carlos Estevez, it makes me feel like there's still that money in the tank to go out there and get another bat. There's also the golden opportunity that the trade they'd been eyeballing or the multiple trades they've been eyeballing are now going to have the price come down a little bit and then they can strike. But I just have this growing confidence that a bat is going to be added. I can't tell you right now who that guy is going to be because this offseason has been a lot different than last offseason. We got a lot of smoke before a move was going to happen. This year, it's been pretty quiet. The Estevez deal, that kind of came out of nowhere. The Lorenzen deal, though it made sense, it kind of came out of nowhere. We didn't really know how interested they were until that signing happened. The Michael Wacha extension came out of nowhere. Didn't think it'd be that early. The Jonathan India deal kind of came out of nowhere. We did get the report the week before the trade happened that they discussed it. But now that we got that the Royals did make a play for Santander and a play for Profar, I still think they're going to be in play for another bat out there. And not just a bench bat or a platoon bat. I still think there's a real-world possibility they're going out there to get a starter. And then they can platoon Melendez and Renfroe with the other corner outfield spot. Or who knows, maybe they're going for a third baseman and they turn Michael Garcia into a little bit of that utility player. We certainly are going to find out here over the next 2 weeks or so. Okay, we're going to take our final break. When we come back, who are some of those free agent options that are still available and which guys do we like the best? We'll talk about that next on Locked On Royals. You are tuned into Locked On Royals and the Locked On Podcast Network. I'm your host, Jack Johnson, and you can find me on Twitter or X at JohnnyJ_15. The last thing we're going to dive into centers around the free agents that are still available out there, and I think that could make sense for the Royals. And I want to tie this in to really the overarching thing we've been discussing the entirety of this episode, which was Ken Rosenthal's article and what it said about the Royals, their play for Santander, their play for other guys that might be out there and still available and wanting to sign a deal with a team like Kansas City. It's going to be one to follow, right? So I do want to circle back to that article and go a little bit beyond the point of where it said Santander was made the offer of 3 years, $66 million from Kansas City. After that sentence or two, Ken Rosenthal goes on to say that it's unlikely the Royals make another significant investment in free agency, but I also didn't take that too much to heart because the guys that are available aren't looking for the big-time investment anymore. If you're still out there in free agency, other than Alex Bregman, in my opinion, I don't think you're getting that 3 or 4 year deal. You're probably getting closer to that 1 to 2 year deal. And so the guys that I think I've been coveting the majority of this offseason are still out there. Randall Grichuk, Adam Duvall is kind of new into this, and then Yoan Moncada. So Rosenthal reports in this article that though it's unlikely the Royals make a significant investment in somebody for that middle of the order bat, they're still in play for guys like Randall Grichuk, guys like Adam Duvall. Those two names being mentioned should not be taken lightly. If Ken Rosenthal name drops guys like that in an article, or Jeff Passan does it, or one of those big name writers like a Bob Nightingale or a John Heyman, they're not always correct, some more than others. I definitely trust Jeff Passan and Ken Rosenthal the most when looking at baseball Twitter and reading a lot of stuff out there. But when two players are name dropped, they're not just name dropped for no reason. That makes me believe that there is some interest of some type in guys like Randall Grichuk and Adam Duvall. Grichuk, I think, is far more appealing than Adam Duvall. Duvall's about 5 years older. He had an atrocious 2024, but he did hit lefties well last year, which leads me to believe they could be looking at that platoon situation because I do think Randall Grichuk could be a bit of a platoon bat as well, as he was for Arizona last year. Grichuk had the better numbers. Grichuk had the better data. Grichuk's going to be more expensive. So if you're looking for that corner outfield bat, I think Grichuk would make you feel pretty good about how the Royals went about their offseason, how things fell. They would have checked off every single box, and even if it wasn't a guy you thought they'd be, they did upgrade their team. I think they would probably come in around a B+ for an overall offseason grade. You go after Adam Duvall, I don't think you'd be sold he'd be on the team the entirety of the year, even though he's a fine defender. He is 35, 36. He hit sub 200 last year. He's more of a platoon bat than anything. Then you bring it to somebody like Yoan Moncada. No, Moncada wasn't really referenced in that article by Ken Rosenthal. You think about what they've been looking for and what they've said they've been looking for this offseason. You go back a few months ago, one of those conversations was they're looking for a left-handed third baseman. And with J.J. Piccolo talking about Garcia getting some run in the outfield, being more of a utility guy, that could open up third base again. And that could open up for a guy like Yoan Moncada, who's not just a lefty, he's a switch hitter. And before his injury, early on this past season with Chicago, he was their best hitter. And I know that's not saying too much, but I think in a lot of lineups for the first month of the year, that would have been their best hitter. And I think Moncada would be a really good fit in Kansas City. And I think he would be the perfect investment on a 2-year bounce back type deal. And I do say 2-year there because if Yoan Moncada comes out and does bounce back and stays healthy, I think you have a really good upgrade at third base there over what Maikel Garcia gave you last year. And Garcia can, use his defense around not only the infield, but now the outfield. And maybe just play against lefties and have a better chance to shine. Whereas Moncada, that upside offensively is more than what you can get with Maikel Garcia. So that's another name that I think you should keep an eye out for. Those three right now are kind of the free agent options that I'm looking at here. And the closer we get to spring training, I think those prices will come down a little bit. And, with Moncada, I think the pitch the Royals could give is, you're not coming here to be a platoon guy. You're coming here to be our starting third baseman, and we're willing to move somebody out of position to make that happen for you. You'd be hitting, near the top, middle of the lineup of guys that feature, or of a lineup that features Bobby Witt Jr., Salvador Perez, Vinny Pasquantino, Jonathan India. You could have somebody like Hunter Renfroe when he is hitting well right behind you in the lineup. It's a very enticing thing for a guy that was on the worst team in modern baseball history last year. And even though he was hurt the majority of that year, I think it would be a good pitch to make, and the Royals will have the money to offer him if that is the route they go. Duvall feels like somebody that would be a last-ditch effort. Grichuk signed somewhere, Moncada signed somewhere, but you just want to have an extra bat, some insurance there in the lineup. I think Duvall would make sense as a platoon guy to go out there with MJ Melendez in left field. But even then, I don't think it moves the needle that much. I don't think it's one of those deals where you go, the Royals for sure fix their middle of the order problems. And all three of those guys, I don't think you could have that 100% confidence that they did fix the middle of the order problems. The best case scenario is that the Royals would pick up a Moncada or a Grichuk, maybe on a 2-year deal to see how it works out. Those guys either build off what they did last year or they bounce back from what they gave you. And then you have somebody like MJ Melendez do what Ryan O'Hearn did for Baltimore, where you think he's down and out, but then he makes a slight adjustment at the plate. We know that he had that stance change. I'll definitely be looking at that here in a few weeks down in Surprise. And if it has looked very different or if it's pretty much more of the same, but you get one of those guys turning in a career year. That's how you fix the middle of the order bat at this point in the offseason. And in my opinion, I think that still has a remote possibility, right? If you go after one of those guys in free agency and that guy takes off in the lineup and the top half of the lineup's going to be just fine, hitting can be contagious. Some of that production could spike a little bit and you take some of that heat, some of that criticism off Melendez, off Isbell, off Renfroe, and they can play a little bit more free and easy. So we'll see how free agency stacks up here in about a week or two, just who's going to be available. I think Bregman is probably going to sign in the next week or two. So that will be, him and Alonso, the two guys that are left that are really the big names out there. Once those two guys are off the board, I do think that those 1-year deal guys, they're going to be flying off the shelves because those guys are going to get to spring training and be ready to go and have a full month of February and March gearing up for the regular season. But I still believe the Royals are going to make a play on a bat. Maybe some of those names or just one of those names will be on their way to Kansas City for the start of spring training. Okay, that's going to do it for us. Another edition of Locked On Royals and the Locked On Podcast Network. I've been your host, Jack Johnson. Thank you for making Locked On Royals your first listen today. For your second Find Locked On MLB as baseball guru Sully brings a daily blend of humor and baseball, keeping you updated on every rumor and story throughout the offseason. Find Locked On MLB on YouTube or wherever you listen to your podcast. We will be back Wednesday unless we do have some breaking news on Tuesday, and if we do, we'll be sure to get an episode up tomorrow. But until Wednesday, as we break down a little bit more of spring training and what to expect, you take it easy, Kansas City.